The Horror Taxi. It was a chilly, moonless night in a small, remote town. The roads were quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel like the world had been abandoned. Sarah, a young journalist, had just finished a late-night assignment in the neighboring city and was eager to return home. Unable to find a ride, she decided to call a taxi from a service she'd never used before. The app showed a car nearby. Within minutes, a sleek black taxi arrived, its headlights piercing through the misty darkness. The driver, a pale man with sunken eyes and a crooked smile, rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice gravelly but oddly calm. Sarah hesitated but nodded. She opened the door and slid into the back seat. The interior smelled faintly of damp earth, and the leather seats were cold to the touch. As the car began to move, Sarah noticed something odd. The dashboard had no GPS, no radio, and no indication of the taxi company. "Excuse me," she said, leaning forward. "Where's your meter?" The driver chuckled, his voice low and unsettling. "Don't worry about the fare. You'll pay it one way or another." The road ahead seemed endless, shrouded in a thick fog that clung to the ground like a living thing. Sarah's unease grew with every passing minute. She leaned against the window, trying to make out landmarks, but the surroundings felt unfamiliar, almost alien. "Are we on the highway?" she asked nervously. The driver didn't respond. Instead, his fingers tapped a strange rhythm on the steering wheel, one that sounded eerily like the ticking of a clock. Sarah glanced down at her phone again, hoping for a signal, but the screen only displayed the spinning icon of failed connectivity. Her reflection in the glass revealed her growing anxiety, and behind her, the faint outline of what looked like another shadow in the back seat. She turned abruptly, but nothing was there, just the cold, empty seat. Trying to distract herself, Sarah asked, "How long have you been driving taxis?" The driver smiled, but kept his eyes on the road. "Longer than you've been alive." There was something about the way he said it, calm, almost nostalgic, that made her shiver. She decided not to push further. The fog outside seemed to thicken, swirling unnaturally. The trees lining the road appeared to bend inward, their branches twisting as though they were watching her. Suddenly the car hit a bump, jolting her forward. "What was that?" she asked, her voice shaky. The driver didn't answer, but she could have sworn she saw something move in the rearview mirror. A pale face, just behind her shoulder, gone in an instant. Panic set in. She tried to open the door, but it was locked. She tugged harder, her breaths growing shallow, but the lock wouldn't budge. "Relax," the driver said, his voice suddenly deeper. "You're perfectly safe, for now." A chill ran down her spine as the temperature in the car seemed to drop. Her breath fogged up the window, and when she wiped it away, she saw something horrifying. Outside, a row of figures stood by the road, their faces pale and their eyes hollow. She gasped, shrinking back into her seat. Who are they?" The driver laughed, a guttural, otherworldly sound. "Passengers, like you." The figures turned their heads in unison, their empty eyes fixed on Sarah. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping it was a hallucination, but when she opened them, the figures were gone. The road now twisted unnaturally, as though the car was driving through a labyrinth. The trees were no longer trees, but skeletal structures that seemed to claw at the car as it passed. Sarah's chest tightened with dread. Suddenly, a faint whisper filled the car. It wasn't the driver. The sound seemed to come from the very walls of the vehicle, wrapping around her like a ghostly embrace. "Sarah." The whisper called. She froze. How do you know my name?" The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes now glowing faintly red. "I know everything about you." She pressed herself against the door, her fingers trembling. The car began to shake, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. Some sounded angry, others mournful, but all seemed to echo one word: stay. The headlights flickered, casting distorted shadows that seemed to move independently. The air in the car became suffocating, thick with the stench of decay. Then the whispers stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Sarah's heart pounded as the driver spoke again, his voice barely human. "We're almost there." The car stopped abruptly in front of an old, decrepit mansion hidden deep in the woods. The driver turned to face her fully, his skin now ghostly white and his features grotesquely distorted. "Welcome to your final stop," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. Sarah's heart pounded as the doors unlocked on their own. Before she could react, invisible hands dragged her out of the car and into the mansion. She screamed, clawing at the air, but the shadows were too strong. The driver simply sat back, lit a cigarette, and watched as the mansion's doors slammed shut behind her. The next morning, the taxi was seen cruising the town again, looking for its next passenger. But Sarah was never found. Her phone, however, was discovered near an abandoned road, with one eerie text saved in drafts: "Don't take the midnight taxi." The end.